Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of Bitcoin for Breakfast. The first episode we're running in February, sadly due to a short interruption in our regular scheduling, but we're back, and what a great time to be back with Bitcoin above 50,000 and a lot of great stories to pick up on across the Bitcoin sphere these weeks. But first of all, before we get to any of that, good morning, everybody. It's great to see a lot of activity in the chat already. If you haven't yet, say good morning to your fellow peers. This is a communal experience, and it's rude to show up and just sit in silence in the corner without introducing yourself. All right, we have a very special guest today, which we're going to bring on a little bit later in the show. Lektor Thaulow, Martin Thaulow, who is a associate professor and a very smart guy who has figured out a little problem with our modern educational system. Perhaps most importantly for him, the fact that people are willing to pay to have other people write their master thesis. We're going to talk about what that says about our educational system and what kind of moral qualms and issues might be connected to that issue. And as well, how that relates to Bitcoin, to what extent are issues that we see in education related to what we see with our money. But before we get that far, we're going to go through our regular numbers. I'm going to skip right over while you guys continue to say good morning in the chat and move on to our regular timing here. As usual, we start with the time chain calendar. The time chain calendar is a fantastic tool if you haven't seen it yet. It gives you all the basic numbers you need to know about Bitcoin on a second-by-second basis. The number one number you see here is the block height. That's how we keep time in Bitcoin, and there's been 830,688 blocks since the dawn of time in Bitcoin terms. That actually means that we're entering a very, very exciting phase for Bitcoin because at 840,000 blocks, we will be reaching the halving. At 840,000 blocks, the block subsidy, the amount of Bitcoin that's put into circulation every 10 minutes, will be cut in half from 6.25 Bitcoin per 10 minutes down to 3.125 Bitcoin. Traditionally, this leads to a certain supply shock and a relatively predictable rise in price. And that moment is now less than 10,000 blocks away. We can really start keeping our countdowns up on our desktop at all times now. The exchange rate is 51,898 USD per Bitcoin, the highest we've seen on this show so far this year, and pretty close to the yearly high. I think we pushed briefly up to 53,000 for a second before retreating again. We had, after the ETF started trading a few weeks ago, a moment where I wouldn't say it was a sell the news event, but there was a moment just after the ETF started trading where Bitcoin retreated to the lower 40s, and it generated a brief but persistent narrative that perhaps the ETFs weren't as important as people thought. But as many people have pointed out, it is impossible that these exchange-traded funds can be buying up so much of the Bitcoin supply without it eventually having a very positive effect on the Bitcoin exchange rate. So as predicted, we are now at yearly highs, and there's no sign of Bitcoin cooling off from here yet. That means, sadly, for those of us who like to spend our days stacking, that for the first time this year, for the first time in several years, you now get less than 2,000 Satoshis per USD you spend. Less than 2,000. Now, if you've gotten used to having 5 to 10,000 sats per USD you spend, you've been spoiled. So now you're looking at this and you're thinking, oh, is it even worth it if I only get 2,000 sats per dollar? But realize, of course, that by the time Bitcoin is at 100K, it will be only 1,000 sats per USD. By the time Bitcoin is at 1 million, it will be a tenth of that again. So this is still always going to be the best opportunity to be stacking sats, never in the future. So don't be too dismayed by the number going down, which is a natural consequence of Bitcoin's success. All right, let's see. What else should we be covering here? Hash rate seems to be... I haven't gotten the chart up yet, but I assume that it's parabolic as it has been for years now. And yeah, I think we can move on from this part of our show. Moving on to the charts. This is just a visualization of what I just said about the Bitcoin price having had a nice move in the last few weeks. We had, as I said, the beginning of the ETF trading, which was right up here at 49,300. Which sent us back down to 38,000, I think was the low, before we are now up to 53,000 again. I am not a trader. I do not risk my my money, especially not my Bitcoin, by gambling it. But there are things we can comment on in this chart, not least this horizontal resistance level from which has been established several times way back in 21, and I think also briefly in 2020. This is the resistance level we're pushing against right now, these little local tops that were back then. That's why there is some sell pressure here, but it seems unlikely that that selling pressure is going to be enough to stop Bitcoin from pushing towards new all-time highs pretty soon. Now, since most of my audience is Norwegian, I feel compelled to point out that in some countries, like ours, Bitcoin is much closer to all-time high already. This is because our currencies are even more shit than the US dollar and has been devalued throughout the bear market, so that Bitcoin's relative value in, for example, Norwegian kroner is actually significantly higher nominally than in USD. Now, this looks like a very crazy chart in many ways, but it is nothing compared to what we would see if we compared Bitcoin to the, say, Turkish lira or the Egyptian pound or the Argentine peso. I think I want to bring up one or two of these charts just to like give you an idea. Let's take the Turkish, I believe this is the right chart. No, I believe I'm completely wrong. All right, help me out in the chat. What's the code for the Argentine peso? Give me the code for Argentine peso or one of these, and I will add it up in the symbols here so we can just see one of the really, really crazy Bitcoin charts. But I need one of the symbols. Yeah, isn't it Turkish lira? Well, all right, let's try it. What if we go? Yeah, it is TRY. I was right. What about this? No. Let's try this again. So it didn't work very well there, but maybe it works better here. Here we go, guys. So yeah, compare this to what we saw with the Norwegian kroner. In many ways, it looks similar, right? You have these two tops back in 2020, 21. Then we have this retreat, which we call the bear market. And then just like we are now seeing in USD, it comes up here and tests these previous highs. But then it just goes parabolic because the Turkish lira is being inflated at a rate that we do not see in the West yet. But for those of you who are laughing at this and thinking, oh, these poor third world countries who can't manage their own currencies, this is coming soon to a currency near you. There is no need for hubris here. It is a matter of time before the Norwegian kroner and eventually the US dollar will suffer the same fate. Okay. Usually I would have liked to show you the mempool here, but I forgot to keep it open. That's easy to fix. Here we go. So in the mempool, fees are fairly low at the moment. We got fees all the way down to, we've had blocks with 15 sat, about fees, 14 sat, 12 sat. We've got some really, really cheap transactions in the last few hours. And if we contrast that to what the fees were the last time we ran the show, which I think was around 150 sats per byte, this is a good time to consolidate your UTXOs or make transactions in general. It's not going to cost you much at the moment. Thank you very much, Flo. I appreciate the help. It's very, very nice of you. So yeah, having covered those basics, I am going to run a little video, and then I'm going to introduce you to today's topic, which is education a scam? Have we all been hoodwinked? And is it even meaningful to talk about someone having qualifications in these days and times? But before that, a little, a small classic to commemorate that Bitcoin is over 50,000 again. This is the run of the Golden Bull.
Their spirits were sunken and low. Their bags weighed more than a ton. There was neither sign nor show when the bull began his run. The shields were shilling wall to wall. The gig was up, they'd had their fun, and every short got the margin call when the bull began his run. The candle's green came fast and tall. Each wick was bold, quick to stun. His eyes burned red, and his horns did more when the bull began his run. Now fortune smiles upon the need. His bags of gold gleam in the sun. The outer stream of his balance sheet, and every bear is left with none. Since the bull began his run.
All right, we are back and we are moving on to today's topic. Is education a scam? Do degrees even have value anymore? And is it wrong or ethically questionable to simply be selling it as a service? We are going to be talking to a man who has made waves in Norway this week. He has had a public interview where he talks about his profession or his main source of income, which is to write master theses, also bachelor theses, to write final theses for individuals doing higher education. They can pay Martin Thaulow in order to get a handcrafted, handwritten thesis, specially tailored for whatever degree you are doing. Of course, this critique, this attack, this undermining of the educational system has been met with a number of responses. Some people are applauding him for pointing out something that is obvious to many people about our educational system. Others are attacking him for potentially being a criminal, for undermining our trust in the educational system, and of course for cheating, for helping people cheat on their degrees. We're going to hear from the man himself. He has so kindly agreed to join us on the channel this morning. So without further ado, here is Associate Professor Martin Thaulow, live from Spain, I believe. Oh, that was supposed to be live from Spain, I believe. Good morning, Martin.
Hi.
I don't know if I did you justice in that intro. It's kind of a weird topic to introduce because there are people almost live in different worlds about this. Some people see the educational system as something very sacred that you can't touch and that you've really rocked with. Others see it as a very welcome opportunity to talk about education. What are your thoughts about your profession? Why are you doing this? Why are you selling degrees for money or selling theses?
Well, it's I kind of stumbled into it, and I didn't have at the time when I started doing this, I didn't have any other opportunities. So I didn't stop to think about the ethical details of it. But as I said to someone at the time, it's a rigged game. So if you're playing a rigged game and you're cheating, you're not really cheating in a sense. So is it ethical? I think it's a hard question to answer. In a sense, it's not. It's unfair to the students who work hard. And for those degrees, I'm helping make the competition less fair. On the other hand, it's already very, very unfair. And I think one of the things that didn't make the cut for that interview was, it's not just doctors and nurses I say no to. I generally try to write for people who are already have a job. So all my clients so far already have a job within that profession or field.
So why are they seeking higher education if they have a job already?
They want higher pay. And I guess this is different from the US to a certain extent. In the US, it matters a lot which university you have a degree from. So there's really a range of a hierarchy of universities. And if your community college is not worth as much as Harvard, Norway, there's no such thing. It doesn't matter at all if you have it from a tiny little university or a big one. It's all been negotiated and fixed, formalized.
So it becomes a checkbox.
Yeah, it's a checkbox. You have a master's. Yeah, here you go. You get $300 more per month, and so that's why I call it a coupon system. It's just no one really cares. They don't care what grade you got either. No one cares. Only the university cares about that if you're going to apply for a PhD.
That's an observation I've made myself. I took on student debt to do a master's degree abroad years ago, and I've had a career in which I've had to be qualified with a master's degree, but no one has ever once asked me to see my diploma or has ever asked me to see my thesis, which I did write myself, by the way. No one has ever asked for it. So one does wonder, like, what was it for? Was it just in order to say on my CV that I had the right kind of qualifications? Okay, I think you need to expand a little bit more your claim that the system is rigged. What do you mean by the system being rigged itself?
Well, what you see in education is it's kind of typical for all centralized monopolies. Education is also a centralized state monopoly. So you see all the same signs that you see everywhere in typical communism. It's corrupt. They have inflation. Poor quality of the products. There's no responsibility. There is little to no innovation. People think, there there are some people in universities in Norway that do important research, but it's far from most. It's a tiny minority, is my guess. Most researchers in Norway are pumping out stuff that no one will read, and I mean literally no one, except the peer review. So if you go to Google Scholar and you search for some topic, most of the hits will have no quotations.
Right.
So, and this has been, I mean, if you look into this, you'll find that it's been talked about in academia too as a big problem. Scholars say they can't keep up because if they spend all day reading research, there will have been published more research the next day within that field than they read yesterday. And most of it is shit. It's just, it's how do I put it? It's objectively shit, you know.
Right.
It doesn't contribute at all. They write it because they have to. That's how it's rigged in most countries, I think. In order to keep your job, it's part of your job is to publish research. So you have to publish research. And the amount of PhDs and employees is going up and up and up. And all these people have to churn out research. And what do? Well, they find some kind of research that's easy to write, often statistical analysis of things. They just find some data and they use statistics on it and they publish it. And a lot of the stuff they write about theory and stuff is just copy paste.
I guess that makes your job a lot easier when academics start having that attitude to their own academic production. Yeah. If so much of the academic text becomes this kind of copy paste, just doing it in order to tick a box, then degrees like you write, which I guess, you know, I guess they must be high quality for people to pay for them. And I guess they must be doing well. But at the same time, I also guess that there is a limited amount of real in-depth innovation you can do in a field when you are doing this as a thesis that you're just writing maybe in a month or however long you spend on it. So I presume that a lot of it has to be based on following exactly that recipe, basically sliding in among all the other nonsense degrees in a way. Or how would you?
Actually not. I couldn't do that. I have to, it's kind of how I work. I have to do stuff I find interesting.
Oh, you have integrity. That's very, very exhausting.
No, it's not integrity. It's just I can't, if it's boring, I can't do it. So I say no to masters in fields or with research questions I find uninteresting, and I do it because I find it interesting. I find some research question that I actually find fascinating, and then I can write it. So
what kind of questions and topics do you find? I'm just personally curious. What kind of questions and topics do you find the most interesting?
Oh, can be anything, but I'm interested in economics and philosophy, argumentation, and learning. Probably the main focus areas for me, and psychology.
2 seconds. I have an echo in the room here because I realized I forgot to close the doors and stuff. So let me just fix that. Can you close the doors so there's not such an echo? It's the best thing about being a podcaster from your own living room. You have to adapt the environment to different purposes every day. It's like it doubles as a TV room, a playroom, a podcasting studio, piano lessons. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. So you are especially interested in education and sorry, I lost the word, but I wanted to bridge it over to what we were talking about before we did the show now. You wanted to talk a bit about parenting and raising children in general. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, it's a bit of a different topic, but it's one that's important to me, and because I mean the entire education system is, in my eyes, been corrupted, or because it's a centralized monopoly. And a lot of people I see can be critical of higher education, and also a lot of libertarians who are very into freedom and individual freedom. They make an exception for children, and they say, well, children, of course, children have to be bossed around like they're in a slave camp or something. And this is it's probably one of the questions I find the most fascinating, and it's because it's hard, you know. Parenting is hard. I think all parents know it's really difficult. And I think, like many other parents, before I had children, I had these high ideals about what kind of father I was going to be, you know. And then you get children and you realize, whoa, it's kind of hard. And you realize you can't follow these high ideals all the time, and maybe not even most of the time. And I think there's like a moral trap there where you kind of look back and you say, well, I didn't act in accordance with my ideals. This is not just in parenting. There's a move you can make there, because it is kind of threatening to your own integrity when you keep screwing up like that.
So you compensate by force.
No, you can make the move and say, well, perhaps it's my ideals that are wrong. Perhaps my ideals are wrong, and I should change my ideals to suit the way I act. You know, as you kind of make excuses for yourself, and I think that happens to some extent. It's happened to me too, to some extent. And particularly when it comes to freedom for children, because that's it's not easy to give children freedom, especially as a parent, because you worry, you know, how are they going to grow up? And I think the argument that I'm trying to spread here is that, the thing that I think people ignore is that for all children, freedom is going to come. Yeah. At some point.
If you don't invite Maleficent to the party, she's still going to be waiting at the gates.
Someday they're going to be free. And I think people should think about, parents should concentrate on making them prepared for that by giving them freedom early. Because I think that's what happens. I don't believe in teenage rebellion as kind of a biological thing. I think that's bullshit. I think it's created, and it's created by them not having freedom until that point. And they don't know how to handle it. Also, teenage risk-taking, if you actually look at the research cross-culturally, that's not a biological thing. It's created by not having freedom until then.
So what do you think are the natural limits of a child's freedom?
Well, it's a balance, you know, because children are not adults. That's not what I'm saying. They're not adults. But I think and I don't know the correct approach to parenting or anything. I don't know. It's it's a hard problem. But what I'm saying is it needs to be a balance between the recognition that they're people, just like you and me, and they have a lot of the same needs and a lot of the same feelings, and they're more similar than we kind of like to think about. But they have particular vulnerabilities. You know, there's a lot of stuff they don't know. So I used to say that maybe we should think about children as immigrants from a very, very strange country. That's kind of my guiding. So what would you do with such an immigrant? Well, you'd be sure to tell them about our culture and how we do things, you know, and they say, well, we don't, here it's dangerous, cars are dangerous, you can't just run across the road, and you kind of guide them around. What you don't do with such an immigrant is to put him in a forced education camp for 13 years, you know?
I have to say, as a father of 3, I think I would probably deport them, but...
We've given the matter some thoughts. Yeah, it's... and also it's... another thing that complicates this is that, and I've talked to a lot of parents about this, and I don't mean to sound as if I don't want to like point a finger at anyone. I'm not criticizing the way people parent their kids. I don't know what kind of kids other people have. And I realize it's an even harder problem too, because it's hard to go from one parenting style to another, you know? So if you've started like a strict regime, and every teacher knows this, if you have a class of students that are used to really a firm hand, you give them freedom, you're going to get mayhem. It's not going to work out. And it also goes the other way. If you have kids that are used to freedom and used to taking responsibility, you're going to have a really hard time getting them to follow your rules, at least without arguing well for it, because they're used to having a say. And this is something that you see in all levels, from the parenting individual kids to classes in schools. And I listened to some Hans Hermann Hoppe yesterday, and it's the same in countries. So, I mean, you could say then that Norway, for instance, is used to strict rules, and we're not used to taking responsibility for ourselves. And you see in other countries, it's the other way around. They're used to freedom, and it's really hard for governments to kind of impose their will on them. You're going to get a rebellion. So we're very domesticated in Norway.
Yes, we're definitely one of the more domesticated populations of the world. I'm wondering a little bit about the connection between the inflation of these degrees. And we started out talking about this, how when everyone has these degrees, they only become these check marks that people have to accomplish in order to get a higher salary or whatever other objective they're pursuing. And that the value in that way is just inflated. People end up paying a lot for something that has an ever diminishing return. How is that connected to Bitcoin and to money? Another topic I know you care deeply about.
Well, it's the inflation. As I said, it's the inflation of a scarce resource by a centralized monopoly. In that sense, it's the same thing. And it has a lot of effects. One is that maybe, I'm not sure, let's say 40 years ago or something, an employer in some business would have 10 applications and none of them would have a master's degree. And so we would have to just use other signals to figure it out. And for many years, university and higher education has had a real use there for employers, because it's been a signal that was rather reliable. And this is building on Brian Kaplan, who wrote a book against education, and he's an economist, and he kind of analyzed education. And he came to the conclusion that the primary function of universities is to provide a signal for employers that signaled the qualities that they were interested in, which isn't knowledge, actually. It's conscientiousness, like being on time, being willing and able to do boring work. For us, it's kind of suited to sort people into an office job, really.
So it becomes less about learning anything and more about proving your behavior or attitudes or personality almost.
But that's a real use case, because employers are facing the work market has a signaling problem. You know, it's expensive for employers to hire a bunch of people that make hires that aren't right. They hire the wrong guy. It's expensive, and they have to train them up, and then they see after a while, no, it doesn't work, and they have to fire him and find a new guy. They'd rather not do that. So for a while there, this employer who used to have 10 applications with no masters had 10 applications with some masters, and it helped him out. He could say, well, I'm just going to interview the masters. But now we're getting to the point where the same employer has 10 applications and all of them have a master's degree. You know, then it doesn't work anymore. It's lost that function. So it's the same principle as with fiat money. You're inflating the supply, and every single unit is losing value in the marketplace.
So it's like everyone has $1 trillion, but what does it matter if everyone has $1 trillion? Because yeah. Mm.
And I don't know if this happens, but I mean, if I were an employer, I would differentiate heavily between a master's or a master's degree that someone got 20 years ago and one that they got last year, because the quality is going down. They even when I graduated back in 2014, I got to see some of my fellow students' master's degree, and I don't mean to be mean, but I mean, I wouldn't have passed them. It was just really, really bad. But they got a passing degree, passing grade.
So there's another perspective on this connection between money and education. I don't know how familiar you are with the work of Saifedean and other popular Bitcoin writers, but they've often pointed out that inflating the monetary supply corrupts everything. It destroys price signals, and it destroys accountability, in addition to obviously being a very centralizing dynamic. And that the way this plays out in education is that you end up having these the state becomes the number one deliverer or framework deliverer for anyone working in education. So people working in education start reorienting their entire thinking about what they are doing towards achieving whatever the government requires in order to pay out. So you end up having, because the government sits with this endless money bag, any academic, their main job is really just to figure out what kind of texts do I need to produce in order to trigger this funding or trigger this support or whatever, and then just go through in order to milk the money printing machine, really.
Yes, Safe has written about education in Fiat Standard, I think, and it's been kind of proven too. There was an article a couple of months ago, I think, where a leading researcher in some field wrote about how he would always mention, he would always tie his research to climate change, because he knew that he would get funding if he did that. And if he didn't, there was no way he would get funding. So yeah, it's become pretty corrupt, and you also see that the clever guys, they're bailing. So I think Peter Thiel, the investor, who was with Elon Musk in PayPal, part of the PayPal mafia. He said that he's trying to hire the people who drop out of Harvard. He's interested in them because his reasoning is that the only smart people get into Harvard. But he thinks that the really, really smart ones realize that it's a pyramid scheme, and they drop out. And I think he's right about that. And you also see some of the really, really good researchers on. I've seen several on Twitter, really talented researchers. They've been talking about crowdsourcing research. They want out too. So you see that people bail from the system. I think it's the same with Bitcoin. The smartest people are bailing the bank system too. And what you see, you get kind of this. There's another similarity there, where just as Bitcoin is a decentralized system that's rapidly outcompeting a centralized one. Banks can't compete with the speed of innovation in Bitcoin. I think Caitlin Long has been talking about this, that really Bitcoin is just running laps around the banks, because banks have both their hands tied behind their back in terms of innovation, because all research has to be done within a walled garden. They can't test things in real time or anything, and they can't even hire people who are in Bitcoin to a large extent. So they're missing out on the biggest talent. And you see the same thing in education, sort of. I think universities can't compete with Twitter or X. I had that realization when I applied.
That was an interesting comparison. Why X?
Well, it's just become the bastion of intellectuals. I mean, you saw it. I don't know if you checked out, what was it called? Instagram tried to put up a competitor to Twitter. I don't remember what they called it.
Threads or whatever it's called.
Yeah, and I mean, it was kind of laughable. Did Zuckerberg actually think that the secret to Twitter was the what do you call it?
Carrot limit.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's the user base, you know.
Yeah.
That's what makes Twitter attractive, and Twitter has for a long time been the home of intellectuals. That's what you get on Twitter. You get a lot of really, really smart people having conversations together. So take peer review. You have in academia, peer review is like a formalized process, and it's completely broken. This is not just me saying this. I mean, it's just Google peer review broken, and you'll get pages and pages. Everyone knows it, but it's there to kind of make sure that the contributors to the discussion are qualified and that they're making sound arguments. On Twitter, this happens in real time, and you don't need a PhD to participate in any conversation. The other participants who are qualified will judge you based on your output, and so you can have you can even be without a high school diploma, and you can be an expert on Twitter if the other experts see that, well, this guy really knows what he's talking about. So Twitter is running laps around academia, and a lot of academics have quit Twitter because they think people are mean.
What does that say, right? That's a really self-own in many ways.
And what happens over time when all academics are just sitting up in their tower talking to each other, while in Twitter the conversations are going haywire, and you have some of the most intelligent people on earth discussing every topic you can imagine. So I think banks are going to lose. I'm almost certain the banks are going to lose the competition against Bitcoin, and the universities are going to lose the competition against social media. They can't win unless they join us, you know.
Well, I think that's a great note to conclude our conversation today. That sums up really well, I think, the main points of what we've been saying here. So with that said, I thank you for taking the time today. I know you had to interrupt your morning schedule and kids driving and whatever to make time for this. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, likewise. It was fun.
Actually, I'm being a little bit too rushed here. We should check if there are any questions in the chat. I didn't see many, but I saw one, and I just want to give that an opportunity to be brought up before we close it off. So the question was, would you say that an apprenticeship is more valuable and value creating than a master's degree?
Yeah, clearly. And I don't mean to say that all education is worthless. I think a lot of education is good, and it's not. Students learn a lot through education, even on bullshit degrees, by hanging out with other smart people and thinking about questions that they wouldn't think about otherwise. So that I'm not saying it's all worthless, and I definitely think that the apprenticeship. I mean, that ideally, I think it should all be apprenticeships, and there shouldn't be an institution, especially not a centralized institution, in charge of it at all. There should be kind of go back to the old ways. And
find yourself a master and follow him around until some of his robes rub off on you.
And it's about. I mean, the thing is that you need closeness to the issue at hand. I mean, that's been the lesson from aid. You know,
yeah.
Everyone knows that aid to Africa or whatever, it generally doesn't work, and it has to do with you can't sit in Oslo and decide what people in some village in Uganda needs. You have to. It's the people on the ground that know what they need. And it's the same thing with education. It's better to work closely with people on learning, and work closely with the kind of job you're going to do. So everyone, I think this is something that I think most people who have replied to my or commented my case, no, my interview, has said that everyone knows you learn a lot more from work than you do from education. You
Right.
learn more in 1 year at the job than you do in 5 years in the university. And I'm saying maybe we should just skip the whole university thing, because it's so expensive. You don't earn anything, you don't create anything, and you take up a loan, a huge loan. It's
You
going
lose
to
a lot of time.
and your time and your energy, everything is poured into writing papers that one person will read and then throw away, and he will give you a letter and a paper. It's so much wasted time. And you could just, I mean, in theory, you could be employed somewhere, and they would teach you how to do the job. But again, the problem here is kind of signaling. That's a big problem that
How do
civilization.
employers find the right employees
Yeah,
if they
it's
don't
a
have
big
degrees?
problem.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem. And part of the problem is also employers. They like the comfort of just looking at the list of achievements and then just, yeah, this guy.
Yeah, I guess employers are lazy too. I mean, they don't want to spend more energy than they have to solve any problem. And
You,
it is very convenient to be able to go through a document and just have these heuristics in your head that you think are going to answer your questions.
it's a big complicated problem. It's also unions are a part of this, because they're the ones pushing for. They want it to be really hard to fire people. And so the compromise is that the employers say, well, fine, but then we're going to have to be able to how do you,
Be very careful when hiring. We have to have a very thin
yeah.
gate. Yeah.
So I think it's there are solutions, but they're kind of radical. So we'll see how that goes.
Enroll everyone in an online homeschool.
Yeah, something like that. I think schooling is a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, I have 3 daughters, and I spend use a fair amount of these online tools to help them with various types of topics that they want to dive deeper in. And the results they have using those tools on those topics are far beyond anything they have achieved in school. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it does make you wonder, why don't I just extend their education to embrace everything?
Yeah. Do you homeschool?
No, they go to private school. The
We're going to start. We're going to start homeschooling now. I mean, it's not just that they learn less. It can be actively harmful, and that's what we saw. We took our daughter out of school a week ago because she's always been fond of math. She really loves math and numbers, and she's been that way forever. And she had a bad test in school, and it was they made like a competition, a multiplication competition. I guess the teacher thought it was going to be fun because they were all into sports there. But she didn't consider that my daughter would have to translate all the assignments from Spanish to Norwegian and calculate it and then translate it back again. So she couldn't do it as fast as everyone else. And she came home from that and said, well, math is no longer my favorite subject. And I thought, well, this is over. We're not going to send her back there ever again. And I think a lot of people, my wife is one of them, have been kind of traumatized by especially math. So people just have they're repulsed by numbers and math because they've been forced to work on it, despite having little to no interest for years and years and years. And they just conclude, well, this is all boring and horrible. And I think this happens to other subjects as well. So I mean, I think school is actively harmful for learning. I think it's a net negative. I think if we didn't have schools, people would be a lot smarter.
I suspect you're right. Sadly, people seem to be very, very attached to their educational systems. There is this joke that if we made the schools teach people how to walk within a generation, people would think that people couldn't walk if they didn't.
Yeah. It's the same with reading and writing. I mean, fun fact is that if you look at historical records there in Protestant countries, literacy rates were like 80-90% well before we had compulsory schooling. Parents taught their children how to read and write fine, and the opposition to state compulsory schooling was mainly because parents didn't want to pay some schmuck from Oslo or something to educate to do what they already did themselves naturally.
Yes.
So I also joke about how would children learn to jump and climb if they didn't go to kindergarten.
Yeah, exactly.
They learn what they find useful, and I'm not worried about reading and writing. Everyone in our society will find it useful to learn how to read and write at some point.
All right. I think that is a good conclusion. Everyone will find it useful to learn and read and write at some point. Homeschool your kids. Make sure you don't waste your money on bullshit degrees, and buy Bitcoin and hodl.
All right.
Take care, Martin.
Yeah. Bye.
Ciao. Oh, let's see. Yes. Still have a new studio. It's a little bit of a challenge for me every time I want to change my scenes, but we're getting there. All right. What a great conversation. Very grateful to Martin for taking the time out of his morning routine to come and sit down with me and educate me about education. Definitely gave me a lot to think about, especially as a father myself. So if you have thoughts or questions, bring them up on Twitter. The show is over, so we won't be having time for more today. But bring them up on Twitter. Martin is there. You should be able to follow him using the link in the description of the video, wherever you're watching this show. As for my part, I thank you all for showing up so early in the morning and joining me for the broadcast. As always, I recommend you check out Bitbox, my favorite Bitcoin hardware wallet. That's where I store all my sats for long-term use. And you should be able to find the link that gives you a discount in the video description below, or on the QR code that may have been popping up throughout the show. So I really recommend checking out Bitbox before you get to work or whatever else you're doing today. With that said, I wish you a great weekend. We are finally there. It's Friday afternoon almost. Not Friday morning still, but the afternoon is getting there. So take care of yourself and the people you love, and have a great weekend. And we will see you back again on Monday or Wednesday. Until then, ciao, ciao.
For we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear. For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon and to the planets beyond. We have had our failures, but so have others, even if they do not admit them. To be sure, we are behind, and will be behind for some time. But we do not intend to stay behind, and in this decade we shall make up and move ahead. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win. The great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest, was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there, and new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and